Hi, today I want to look at a common problem that ran into myself, as well as I see a lot of postings on the Alteryx community about how to deal with what I classify as messy data. Alteryx is great when you get data into its workflow. You can do any kind of manipulation and cleanup that you need, some more easily, some more complexly. But ultimately, when the data is in your stream, you're good to go. But how do you get this data into the stream sometimes is where it gets to be a bit complicated, especially when you're having to read multiple files and you don't want to do it manually. So what is our problem statement? Well, very simple. I'm sure that you've ran into this or you might run into this sometime in the future. So keep this whole example in mind. So every day I get multiple data files. They're all Excel spreadsheets with multiple tabs in them. And I get them from a couple of different sources. They're sent to me. They've changed over time. And there are some minor issues that crop up every now and then when I'm trying to read them. Mainly what I see is there's some minor naming inconsistencies in the fields. It might change from tab to tab or spreadsheet to spreadsheet, day to day. I'm not sure why, if this is being generated automatically, but I can't ask those questions. I just have to deal with them. Additionally, there's some columns that people like to add towards the end of it. Maybe they're sending a spreadsheet to somebody else as well as to me, so they just add additional columns that they need. I don't need them, but I have to deal with them. And then the final thing is that there are slight variations in the data types. As you know, Excel can go ahead and type your columns, and Alteryx brings in that data type and translates it properly. But sometimes you might get a numeric field as a text or something else that's strange that makes it different from tab to tab or spreadsheet to spreadsheet. Given all of this, if I try to use a dynamic input to read all of these, I get errors because everything's not the same. So the question becomes, how can I read this data easily and repetitively without doing a whole lot of work? And here's a solution that we're going to talk about, and that is that I'm going to create a macro that reads a file of known type. We'll talk about that when we get to it. I'm going to ignore the field names. I'm going to ignore the data types, and then I can create a workflow that first of all feeds the macro, but then also cleans up the data once we're done. Because at that point in time, if I do this first part properly, I can get all of the data, and I just have to figure out what it means. So let's take a look. I'm not going to walk through building all of the macro and workflows, but I will show you just basically how I went about creating the first piece of this. As I bring up my Alteryx, I happen to already have started this, and I brought in what I'm calling my stub file. And this is going to be the basis for my macro, but I need to bring it in and make sure it works first. So I have this stub. What I want to do with it is I want to go ahead and make sure all the data types are textual and don't bring in their type. So let's go ahead and run this very quickly. Click on this. In case you don't do this regularly, you can bring up the metadata over here and it shows you I have doubles and V strings. And I want to go ahead and make sure that everything is a V string. And the question becomes, how can you do this programmatically? Well, there's some very difficult ways, but there's also a very easy way. And it happens to be, and I'll just go ahead and pull this in because some of these are fun to do. And that is that over here inside of preparation, we happen to have the multi-field formula, one that people tend to avoid. I avoid it unless I have a specific need for it. And it is simply saying that I want to go ahead and select all of these columns. Oops, where did C go? Ah, there we go. Select type fields. Always remember how to do all this is that I want to select all types of fields. It's down here. There it is. All types of fields. Select all of the fields. So anything coming, remember that dynamic or unknown fields is great for a macro. I do not want to copy the fields to the output. I want to change the output data type. This is a cool place to do this. So for every column coming in, I'm going to change it to a text of 2000 just to make sure we're clean. And my expression is going to be very simple. All I want to do is just simply copy in the current field. Double clicking on that puts in the designation for the current field. Now when I run this, you can see that we go ahead and have V strings for all of these. So now we've taken care of problem number one. Let's go back to our data view. So there we have the same data, but now everything is a text field. That is super. Next, what I want to do is I want to change these column names because they might change slightly, and I want to make sure that they're all accounted for and don't give me any issues along the way. And what I want to do is give it a generic name. Well, if you come across here, again, what we're trying to do is expand ourselves out into a lot of other of the widgets that are available. In case you haven't used this one before, the dynamic rename is a great way of on the fly giving your columns a new name. As you can see here, we bring this up. I want to go ahead and use, this is sort of tricky and you have to bear with it. So we want to go ahead and dynamic rename. I want to use all of the fields, including any dynamic ones. I want to use an X formula right up here. And all I want to do down here is give it the name of field. Going ahead and running that, you see that it said that I had multiple names of fields, so it changed them for me dynamically, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. So now I have field, field 2, and field 3. In case you don't like field and you want it to be field 2, well, we have another really interesting way. Just go ahead and add one more widget into it. Again, you can add as many widgets as you need to get the work done, making it as simple as possible. Stacking them together really doesn't cause a problem. What is it that you want to do? Well, very simply, I'm going to go ahead and rename. Look at all the potentials for the field. In fact, in this case, rename just the field, use a formula, and let's go ahead and call it field 1. Because the other ones we saw were field 2, 3, and 4. We run this. Come to the output of it, and sure enough, I have field 1, field 2, and field 3. So now everything has been dynamically changed, the names, the data types of our charts. That means that I can roll through everything coming through here without any issues, and then I can fix the data. Great to do. What do we need to do now? Let's go ahead and turn this into a macro. Sorry for the cough. It is allergy season in Texas, and I inadvertently went outside to have breakfast, and that caused my allergies to go slightly crazy. So we want to turn this into a macro. So very simply what we want to do is to pop in here, go into our interface. We want macro output. Drop this on to the end. Couple of things we want to make sure that we do. Anyway, output name is going to be simply output, and I sometimes like to go ahead and give it an anchor called D. We also want an input, and in this case we are going to be passing in a macro parameter. There it is, control parameter. Let's go ahead and call that full file name. And what we want to do here is to go ahead and bring down our action. Now, a couple of things we can do with this action right here. Oh, I love it when it gets circular that way. Let's drop this down, see if we can get non-circular about it. How really neat. There we go. We're non-circular. By default, it's going to update value. You might want to take the option of simply updating the value of the file. Keep in mind that when you do this, it is going to assume it's an Excel spreadsheet. I sort of wanted to make this more generic, so I played with it first, doing it with an Excel spreadsheet, and then gave it other files. And what I've determined I like doing is update the input data tool. What this does is pretty amazing if you think about it. Rather than just changing the file name and trying to read it as a spreadsheet, it will actually look at the extension and assume what the extension is telling it. So if it's a known extension, then it will default to that type of file. It doesn't allow you to change any of the operations of it, but at least allows you to read multiple files. What this means is that if I send it a CSV that is actually separated by commas, it will also read that as well. I can also mix and match the data types that are coming in. So if I have a spreadsheet coming in and I have a data file that's a CSV or even an Alteryx file, I can go ahead and just pass them into the same macro all at the same time, and it goes. So this macro works pretty well. There's one thing that we want to do as well, and that means going into the interface designer. In case you don't have that turned on, don't forget you have up here view. You can turn on the interface designer and I then go ahead and pin it on the side. So interface designer down here, we want to go ahead and check the fact that what we want to do for the output mode is all iterations will have the same output schema, error if different. So this way, if we have extra columns, not extra columns, it'll go ahead and do that. Sounds good. Auto configuration by name and position. Whoops, sorry, I need to change this. Go back again. This is default. This is the default. This won't work for us because it'll error out. What we want to do is auto configure by position. Wait until all iterations are run. I had to read that through twice. It's fun to read these little pauses that we want to do. So now this actually gives us a macro that will go ahead and work. I'll save this in my macro library. And then it can work and we will test it with some data flows. So I've already developed a workflow that performs my multi-file, multi-tab read. And we're going to go ahead and skip into that very quickly just to show you how it works. I take this guy off at the end of it right there. So this is a basic workflow. It does a directory and it chooses just the full file path. Add some text into it to get a list of sheet names. Let's go ahead and run this. You can see the outputs. So here I have simply a file name. Here I have a file name appended with the text for getting a full list of file name tab names at the end of it. I can pass that into my dynamic input. In this case, dynamic input is found here in developer. And then ultimately it results after I do a quick modifications of appending the sheet name to the file name. It gets me the fully qualified Excel spreadsheet and tab name that I can pass to my macro. Again, if you have questions about how I put this together, check some of my older videos or go ahead and subscribe. Drop me a comment and say you're a bit confused as to what I did, and I can run out there with a quick video and re-explain exactly what this piece of work does, but it's pretty standard. Of course, it's only standard because I know how to do it. I've done it many times. It might be new to you, so go ahead and ask any questions. Hopefully you become a subscriber. So what I've done now is I have that list of the fully qualified name that I can go ahead and pass into my generic file reader macro. I've saved all my macros up here. I have my generic multi-file reader. I'm going to show you a quick little bug that I ran into when I was developing this, and I just remembered to show it to you. I want to give it a full file name. So it'll run all these files through, hit the run button. You notice that it went ahead and it only ran one iteration, and however it looked at all these pieces of file. We also want to make sure that we turn on the show all macro messages here in the runtime configuration. But you might say, why did it only run one iteration? This is one of those things that I really can't explain why Alteryx does, but it does some of these very interesting things you have to work around. I put a browse on the end here. We go ahead and run this again, and you can see that it ran multiple times. Look at my browsed output. Shows you 22 iterations were run. And so now here's my full data set. You can see all the fields are named generically. We also have some extra fields on the end that we don't really need. Let's go ahead and do some more of the fun work, which is that, again, what you want to do at this point in time is to go ahead and do some cleanup work. I have a list of what I want my column names to be. I come back into my developer and my dynamic rename right here. Show you a different version of this. So what I want to do here in the dynamic rename is use these names. The rename formula is to simply take the field names from the right input rows. A lot of options in here. Put a select on the end of this if I want to change some things. Because remember, the data types are all Go ahead and run this. As you can see, the data types, there we go. Look at the metadata, it's all vstring. We want to go ahead and change these to what we want to be, and to remove those that we don't want. We don't need field 7, 8, and 9 because those were extras. These guys we all want to be integers. We can, if you've not done this before, you can go ahead and highlight a number of them, go into options, is change field types here to integer 32. All these get changed. Batch timestamp is a date time. And the billing type is going to be fixed decimal. Well, before we do that, let's just show you one more thing that's interesting to see. This goes back to a college class that I had that always comes back to mind. If we look at the data here, oh, nice to see we don't have any conversion. Sometimes you get conversion errors here in the bill amount. Then on this case, so that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and change that bill amount to a fixed decimal. So the point of that was to show that you might get some conversion errors going from numeric to text, but it cleans itself up again when you go back to text to numeric. All it has to do with rounding errors and how well the computers can actually do their math. Didn't see any this time. And so now we look at the metadata. We see the metadata matches what we want it to do, and that the data matches as well. So the bulk of this was to go ahead and get all of our data into our stream, so then we can begin to manipulate what we want to do with the stream afterwards. What you need to do depends on what your data looks like. And we're going to take a look at another version, which is dealing with CSV files. I also wanted to test my workflow to see if it works with a CSV file. And again, this works if the CSV file is a default CSV file. If it has anything specific extra you need to do, you'll need to work that through in your own macro, or possibly create multiple versions of the macro to do generic reading. In this case, I had a very generic set of CSV files, took the same data, had two CSVs for puppy invoice, ran them into my macro, gave it a little dynamic rename that we did before. We'll skip through that very quickly. We see that we went ahead and read both of those files, and we have our data as output. Notice we have an extra field here that we really don't need. The problem that I ran into that I really didn't like when I did this is I saw that the batch timestamp, because right at this point in time, you'll notice that we are all simply V strings. So this is not a standard batch. This is not a standard date time from Alteryx. It's sort of bastardized in the Excel CSV kind. It has the wrong order. It's rather than year, month, day, it's month, day, year, and the actual time is hours and minutes. Does not include seconds. So I needed to fix that. How did I fix it? Well, it just so happens I had a macro sitting around that I wanted to use to do this with, and it happens to be a convert macro. So come into my macros. Over here we have convert month, day, year to date, time. So I got a little macro. It actually does a lot of different work. It will go ahead and figure out what is missing in your date string and go ahead and reorder it. It does this using one of my other fun to use or fun to use, really not fun to use. I use it a lot, but a lot of people aren't really comfortable with it. Here in parse, we have the regex parser. I am not a big regex person, but if you're going to be doing regex for the first time, needing to convert and get multiple fields out of it, I recommend that you look into the regex widget. It's a great way to get the data out of it. That's what's used here to go ahead and flesh out what the date string looks like coming in, dealing with optional pieces, getting everything put back together again so it can give you a nice value going out the other side. But again, that's the source of another video. If you have questions about such a macro, wanting to create your own macro, want to see what I do, go ahead and subscribe, drop me a comment, and I can walk through a video of simply the regex tools to the best of my knowledge. I tend to be very much cut and paste. So seeing how this all works coming out of here, let's go ahead and round it out by in our preparation. Let's go ahead and put our select on the end of all this. Oh, we forgot to tell what we need to do here. What field? Oh, it happens to be field 6. Put the select on the end. Let's go ahead and run this real quick right where we're at here. Field 6 that's what I thought was going to happen. That's the reason why I wanted to run it. Let's then come back to this guy again because it didn't see the dynamic rename. It can't read through that, so we needed to execute it along the way. Again, since this is a dynamic tool, it doesn't know what's going to happen. Run it once so you can see what it happens. Then it makes life a whole lot easier going through, which is what I failed to do as I hurried to try to get through this video in a much shorter time frame. But that being said, you can see that I've gone ahead and converted this out. I have this out to date time. It's going to bring the data up. So here is the batch timestamp text string coming in, and we have a really nice out-to-date time coming, which we really want to be our batch timestamp. It looks a whole lot better, even though it was sort of messed up, mixed up, confused, truncated by the Excel process. So now that I'm here, I can go ahead and fix this. We don't want batch timestamp. We don't want field 7. This out-date time is actually my batch timestamp now. And each of these, we want to go ahead and change all those in integer 32. And then finally our billing amount, which is going to be fixed decimal 10.2. Drop a quick browse onto the end of this. And you can see that now I have some data out here from my CSV files. And again, part of the reason to do this is show how this same macro can read different data types or different file types, giving you a standard set of data coming out the other end, which you then need to clean up. However, it needs to be cleaned up. And the cleanup process is what Alteryx is designed to do. There's many ways you can do it, but the issue that you run into, and the reason for this video, is to show you how to get all of your data into a single workflow so that you can then fix the data and go on from there. Hope this helps. I had fun building it. I'm going to go ahead and post this on the Alteryx community because I think it's very helpful to them, and I hope that you enjoy it as well. Again, subscribe, drop me comments, anything that I went through quickly here that was sort of the supporting information along this workflows. Drop me a comment. We can always do a specific short video just to address those needs and give you some help. Have a great day.